welcome to the Hallmarkies podcast. We're so excited today to be talking with a Hallmark director. This is so fun. We love talking with the directors. And today we have with us David Weaver. And thank you so much, David, for coming on the podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so what we like to do with our guests is find out at the beginning what inspired you to become a director. How did you end up in the career that you have?
Yeah, well, it's kind of my dad's fault. He was an executive for CBC Radio, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, all through from the 60s through to the 80s. And he never worked, pardon me, he never worked in TV, or he only worked in TV very briefly, but he knew a lot of people who did. And he knew a lot of people who were both feature film directors and television directors as well. And so from a far too early age, I knew what it meant to be a director, and I thought it just sounded amazing. And then as I, grew up and became a teenager, I loved to go to movies. I would go to the rep cinema all the time, and I just was a voracious TV watcher and very into old films and all that kind of thing. And so when I was able to go to university, I did a BA, and then I went to film school at Columbia University in New York, and that led to my first scripts and my first films.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was it like when you got your first directing gig?
Well, it was interesting because the way I started was in indie features. So sort of the first gigs were things that I kind of created or produced myself. And so for a long time, for I'd say like the first decade of my career, such as it is, I really kind of initiated things myself. But then I got married and I wanted to start a family, and I wanted to, work more, work more regularly. But it was thrilling it's thrilling anytime that someone brings you a project and believes in you enough to try to think that you're the person who can, shepherd it forward. But it was certainly a thrill when I started to get television work, and when I started to really be able to do this, as more than kind of, a hobby that my parents, wondered whether it would ever work out for me,
Yeah. Would you say that I've heard it said that the directors or the CEO of the movie kind of coordinating all the different pieces?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's accurate?
Yeah, there's some truth to that. I mean, it's a very strange position in a way, because on the one hand, it's intensely creative. But on the other hand, there is a lot of time management involved. And you have to be able, particularly with television movies, most of which are made on, very short 15-day schedules, you have to be able to really understand what you want to achieve and how to achieve it, and what means are at your disposal, and kind of create the right structure within which you can allow your creativity and the creativity of the crew members and the creativity of the performers to really flower. So, I think the CEO analogy is accurate, but it sort of only tells half the job, because when I think of a CEO, I think of someone who's very, might be very spreadsheet driven or something along those lines. And there's certainly an element of that to the process of directing, but you want to get past that to create a safe environment or a great environment for your collaborators to express their creativity in. And that's really, for me, what is key about the position, is about the job, is being very eyes open about what we can achieve and how we can best achieve it, so that we don't pretend that we have more money or more time than we actually do.
Do you go over the daily kind of shots that you're hoping to get with your director of photography?
Yeah.
And then if they say, well, I think we should do this shot this way, like how does that all kind of work out as far as who kind of
Sure.
decides what it ends up in the final product.
Sure. Well, so all directors work different ways, and
Mhm.
one of the mysteries of it is, even after you've been to film school, or you can listen to, a lot of what I tell kids who are asking me about directing is, it's great to listen to commentary tracks on the old, DVDs, or in the iTunes extras or what have you, of the films that you really love, because a lot of times that's the best schooling, is that you'll learn from other directors' experiences. But everybody does it in a different fashion, and I often say that I do it exactly the same way as when I was 16 years old, and I was in the backyard with a video camera, and the sun was going down, and all my friends wanted to go home, and I had one more shot, and I was trying to talk them into doing that. And so the thing there is that I like to plan. So what I've done in the past is I do a list. I go through the script when I receive it, and often the scripts are still in they're often still in flux, in the sense that there's rewrites being done, or things that the network have asked for. So you're planning the movie even while things are changing. So that's sometimes a challenge. Then what I do is I go through the script, and I really just try to sit by myself and visualize the movie in my head, and see the movie, how the shots look, how the actors perform, particularly if I've started to learn who the actors might be. And think to myself, well, this is where we would love to have a great sweeping crane shot, say. This is where we want, this is an intimate moment, so this is where we want to be in a close-up, a really tight close-up. This is almost like, one character's chasing another, so this is where we really want to move the camera really as swiftly as we can. That's very simple, pragmatic things, all based on, you know, my film knowledge and my love of movies. And then I write those down, and I make a shot list, and I'll circulate that to the cinematographer, and to the assistant director, and to the some of the other members, the producer, and so forth. But really, from that point on, it's trying to realize that shot list, at least for me. So yes, I'm always welcoming towards anyone who has an idea for something, but at the same time, I guess I would say that idea, I have to feel that that idea is better than whatever idea I had.
Mm.
Best idea wins. And
Right.
so, we go through the shot list, we look at that. Sometimes I can draw, so sometimes I'll draw what I'm proposing. And then the cinematographer, if he needs a crane, if we need to order a crane from the equipment house on that day, then that's something he'll run off and do that. He'll take care of that side of things. Um, so it's collaborative, but I really do, I really feel like it's my job and my privilege to be the one that says, well, this is how I see the film, and this is, and can we execute it?
Mhm. Yeah, and so after you finish the day of shooting, then you have the dailies
Hmm.
to look over, and those go to the editor. And so
Hmm.
are you in communication with the editor as far as
Yes.
what things you want kept, what things maybe you might not want to keep,
Yeah.
or you're kind of on?
Yeah, yeah. So again, everybody works differently, but there's a position. It's been on the last couple of movies. It's been filled by my great friend Jen, who is what's called the script supervisor, and it's her job to keep track of all of the continuity between the different shots and the different scenes. So, for instance, if she's one in charge of making sure that the character is in the right dress, because you might shoot one scene at the beginning of the schedule and then shoot the following scene 3 weeks later, on another day, and the character, it won't make sense if the characters change their clothes. So continuity takes care of that basic element. But for me, because she sits beside me with the cinematographer in front of the monitors all day, what she'll also do for me is take down my reactions to the film as I see it in front of me. So I sometimes say that I'm the first audience member for the movie, really. And I'll just talk to her even during a take sometimes, and I'll say, oh, that moment is great. Make sure that Kelly, the editor, uses that. Or as we move to new camera setups, I'll say, remind Kelly that we want to start with the tracking shot and then we'll go to the medium close-up shot, that sort of thing. So what I really find is great about working with someone like that is that it's a constantly evolving thing, the movie in front of me, and I try to react to it spontaneously. And a lot of times you'll find that my reactions are what works for the movie, are the way that the movie is ends up being edited. And that's because you can see in front of you, like, oh my God, Laura Osmus just had an amazing moment where, her eyes told her how she's falling in love with, Juan Pablo. And so, or, Alison Sweeney just gave the, I just did a Christmas movie with her. She just gave the cutest look about when, that character said something that's a little dubious. And you just want to make sure that in all of the sea of footage that the editor receives, those moments aren't lost, because that's really what builds, the quality, the texture of the movie. So then I, then I go in the edit suite and sometimes I'm like, where's that moment? I remember that, because a part of it's a tool for me as well to remember what I really loved. And once in a while, I've worked a lot with Kelly Herron as an editor, and once in a while he'll say, well, it didn't really work, or he'll say, oh, I missed that note, or we go back and try it and we try to make it work and see if it fits in the film. But it really is, it's really a privilege. Like, you get to see you're the first viewer of the movie, and when the movie's working, and when there's chemistry between the actors, or just a great spontaneous, a lot of, like, I love accidents when something goes wrong during a take and the actors have to react to it, and it keeps them fresh and in the moment. Those are the things that I want to see in the movie, because they make the movies feel more real, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, that's interesting to me. I like learning about the behind the scenes, kind of what goes into making these movies.
Yeah.
And so once the movie is edited, are you the one who makes decisions as far as like songs or music, or if there's like a visual effect that's needed or something like that? And
yeah, it differs a little bit. Definitely if there's a visual effect, because often the movies have an air date and there's a bit of pressure to finish the movie. So for instance, you have to make decisions about whether, you'll have, say, in a Christmas film, whether you'll have falling snow, which will be real falling snow that you'll do on the set, or whether it'll be a digital effect. Because that determines how much time they need in post-production to get those effects done. So a lot of those decisions are made even before you're on the stage. They're made in prep. And then in terms of music, I love to have input on that. It depends on the movie. Sometimes I know the composer, and so I'll communicate with him directly. And a lot of times as well, there are musical components to the films. So you've seen even more Hallmark movies than I have. You've seen more than I've directed. So, often people go to a dance, or there are dance scenes, or, there might be a band playing or something like that. So I'm fortunate that I usually have, that's usually a conversation between me and the network executive and the producers and then the composer. And then there's a thing that I think is really an amazing role. It's kind of the best job in the world, which is called music supervisor, which is basically the person who's in charge of going out and finding music for the movie. So what's called needle drop, from the old, having a record and the needle drop music, which is, so say if there's a scene where the couple have to dance, and you want a more recognizable song. And so there's the whole music supervision side of things where they have to go out and find that song and see, can, sometimes can we afford that song? If we can't afford that song, then, what other song would work? But what's really been great in the last few years with the Hallmark films is that Hallmark has made a real commitment to finding better music. So I made a movie last year and a half ago or a year ago called Playing Cupid. And in that film, uh, Laura Vandervoot and Nicholas Gonzalez are cooking in a kitchen, and that on the set we played Ain't No Mountain High Enough, and the actors loved the song, and it's a classic song, but we were not sure whether we could afford it to have the song in the movie. And the network was great and really supportive, and went out and purchased the rights to that, which I'm sure was not cheap. And so now when you watch the movie, you see the actors responding to this great classic R&B song, which hasn't been replaced by something that's maybe not as exciting or not as familiar, not a classic. So that's what I really love, is when we are able to get those pieces of really key music into the movie. And I just think it really, it's like it makes you think of like something like the Big Chill, how important music was to that movie. So I love it when that happens, and that's one of my favorite sequences that I've ever directed. So
Yeah, that's still one of my favorites of
oh,
this year. I think that was a really fun little movie. I liked the
yeah,
script, and I liked that whole scene was very charming. It helped
thank
build the
you.
chemistry.
Yeah, and at the same time, it was very realistic. I mean,
Hmm.
she was just dropping by to help him prepare some food for I think it was for the school, and you can see, and that's why Laura and Nicholas were so phenomenal as performers, because you can see I mean, they don't have any. I mean, they have a few lines of dialogue, but it's very inconsequential. But you can see through the scene like their chemistry, and you can see their relationship take a real leap forward. And that's what I really love, is when the movies communicate something visually, and you're really inside the characters' heads, and you can see how he's looking at her differently now, and how she's looking at him, and she's thinking about him romantically for maybe
Yeah.
the first time. And that's and you can feel that on the set, because Nicholas and Laura really got along, and so they really embraced that moment, and and we just shot it really simply with two cameras. And we just ran it a few times, and each time as we ran it and we played the music, you could feel even the crew getting excited about it. And that's the thing that I always pay attention to too, is that when the crew is engaged with something, when they're alert to like the chemistry that's happening on screen, or the intimacy of an emotional moment, or any of that sort of thing, that's when you know that you have something that's kind of special. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, well, and the whole lip sync scene is such a rom-com staple that it's
Yeah.
fun when we get it. Yeah.
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 Yeah, I really love that genre. I'm
Hmm.
really familiar with it, going all the way back to, like George Cukor movies in the 30s and the
Hmm.
40s. And I kind of see the Hallmark movies as the continuation of those
Yeah.
movies, and I think that I think that they're, I think the network is getting really so exciting in terms of like the scripts that they're starting to embrace, and that there's greater
Hmm.
diversity in the movies, and that the stories are a little bit more reflective of people's lives, and the challenges that they have in their lives.
Hmm.
And I think that's, if you go back and you look at those romantic comedies from the 30s and the 40s, the Cary Grant films, or the Katharine Hepburn
Hmm.
movies, or all of those, all of those films that I particularly love Jean Arthur movies.
Hmm.
It's exactly the same thing. I mean, there's an amazing Jean Arthur movie called called The More the Merrier, which George Stevens directed in, I'm going to say like 1942 or 1943. And she comes to Washington and she can't find an apartment. And it's all about how she ends up, with Joel McCrea, like basically living in the same apartment with Joel McCrea, and how how they fall in love. But that was the truth of those people's lives in those days, And so those are the movies that I really love, in Playing Cupid. As you remember, Nicholas Gonzalez's character David is going through a divorce, and there's some moments which are really difficult for him, and Laura's character, that's part of what makes her fall in love with him, is that things aren't simple for him and
Yeah.
easy. So those are the movies. So I'm a real aficionado of those movies, and I feel that like we're making movies in that genre and in that tradition. So.
Yeah. Well, and it's no secret that Hollywood has just stopped making films for women.
Yeah.
And the target demographic for most movies made today is 17-year-old boys.
Yeah.
And so you'd be so excited when something like Crazy Rich Asians came out, because it's like you hadn't had anything like that for quite a while, at least that was quality. And so people turned to Hallmark because that was where you could watch a fun rom-com. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is true in your life, but I mean, I have a 13-year-old boy, so I go to see those movies.
Sure.
But there's fewer and fewer movie theaters. I mean, it's a real commitment to go to see a movie, and you have to drive for like an hour. You have to find parking. You have to find a sitter. You have to all to see the Avengers Save the World, which, trust me, I love, and it's great. But at the same time, I mean, there are all these moments when I come home, I've had a long day. I talk about this when we do pre-production on the films. Sometimes people just want to sit in front of the television and be transported, and see a great love story or something of that romantic comedy genre. But at the same time, they don't want it to be cliched or too easy for the characters, and the movies that we remember and that we love are when it almost seems as if it won't work out, or it works out in in an unexpected fashion. So that's what I love about those movies, from the 30s and the 40s, is that the Philadelphia Story, like, is she going to end up with Cary Grant, or is she going to end up with Jimmy Stewart? Like, they're both pretty dishy, and there's real kind of tension in that movie about like what's going to happen. And so, when I make these films, I try to keep that idea, that template in my head, and genuinely treat the stakes of the story the way they should be. And I think the movies get better when you really invest in them, and when what they're a part of, that part of film history that you're drawing on. So,
and even if it is predictable, if it's funny enough, like something like Christmas in Connecticut, if you're going old school, which is so funny that it doesn't matter that it's predictable, because you're enjoying the experience. But then also, if the couple has enough chemistry, then you can accept the most ridiculous plots.
Like a lot of what I like in the movies is when the characters tease each other, and are comfortable enough with each other's foibles or flaws that they can make light of them. And part of the interesting thing about making films is that it might be something that you always suspected, but it's the performers come to the movie not knowing each other. And so one of the things that happens sometimes on the film is, as they get to know each other and they become friends, then you start to feel that chemistry inside the film. So what I've tried to do in the schedules a little bit is to move, the key romantic moments of the end of the story to the end of the movie making schedule, to the end of the production schedule, so that then, if you're fortunate, and I've only ever made one movie where I felt like there wasn't much chemistry between the performers, but if you're fortunate, then by the time 3 weeks have gone by and they've been spending 15, 16 hours a day, sometimes in the rain or the snow or what have you, together, and they've come to like each other, then they can draw on that chemistry for those scenes. And I think that when it works, and I think Laura and Nicholas would admit to this, when it works, it has a kind of, it's where, a little bit of the reality of their friendship comes to bear on the romance scenes. And I think the audience can see that.
Well, that one really, the chemistry went a long way in that movie, because I have to admit, when I first read the synopsis, I was like, this sounds really boring to me,
Yes.
because they have made other Hallmark wine movies where,
Yeah.
because I just don't care about wine, or that's
Yeah.
not interesting to me.
Yeah.
So like the whole, is the wine going to be ready? And
Yeah.
like it can be really boring.
You're like,
And
I'll take a pass.
plus, that it's going to be ready. Like,
Yeah.
that. So it's kind of like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
But I thought they had really good chemistry.
Yeah.
And that really helped it a lot to work. And I thought also just sort of her growth as a person, as you followed her, since she was so kind of, I'm not gonna say controlled by her boyfriend, but
Yes.
it wasn't like that strong of a character to start with. So as she grew, I thought that made it better, because you got to see her become empowered by the end.
Yeah, I mean, we were pretty conscious of that. I sometimes feel like the synopses for the movies don't always do them justice. And that's because they almost always talk about the relationship between the characters on a kind of even basis. Like, she wants to be a master som and he's a winemaker, but I mean, and I think Juan Pablo would say this, I mean, but the bigger growth is for her character, as you said. And so it's not just her movie, but her arc. We start with her and then we end with them as a couple, but we really follow her arc as a character, and we see her grow as a person. And that's, I think, goes back to what you were saying a moment ago, which is that if there's a predictability to the story, then what you want to do is, as much as possible, bring the texture to the piece, as much texture to the piece as possible, so that the person seems real, and that the desire that they have that's motivating them is something that's really, really passionately held. And so what I thought was amazing about Laura's performance was that and this really corresponded again to real life, because we had Jennifer Huther in the movie who had become a master som, and it took her 6 years to pass that exam. And you felt, I think, how deeply important this was to Laura, and then as well how she was sort of living out an idea that her grandmother had always aspired to this, to achieve this. And I think if you hadn't felt in Laura's performance that it was a really great passion in her life, if that didn't feel real and textured, then the movie wouldn't have succeeded. So a lot of it really does come down to how deeply are the performers going to invest. And then, commensurately, Juan Pablo, because he is Argentinian, he said at points like, this is the food that I would create for this dinner. This is what I remember about growing up in Argentina. And so can I change this speech to reflect my childhood? And that's what makes the movie richer. So the synopses I think sometimes don't do the movies justice, truthfully.
Yeah.
So.
No, I agree. And sometimes they don't even really explain the movie at all. You're like, what?
Yeah,
this is not what I just watched.
It's a tricky thing, because all movies can be made to sound, too simplistic.
Yeah.
But I do feel like that's an area in which I guess what I would say to people listening to the podcast is don't always trust the synopsis, because it's not going to necessarily emphasize what I think were the most exciting elements of the movie. So
we'd like to take a second from this episode of the podcast to celebrate our sponsor of this episode, and that is the Hallmarkies Patreon.
Do you love Hallmarkies podcast?
Do you want an inside scoop into what happens on the podcast?
Do you want early access to episodes and loads of cool perks?
Now is the time to become a patron of Hallmarkies Podcast.
By becoming a patron, you get to access our patron Facebook group.
You can request episodes or even be a guest on the podcast.
And most importantly, any patron can join our monthly movie watch-alongs with stars like Paul Campbell, Natalie Hall, and more.
It's as low as $2 a month to join in and become a special part of the Hallmarkies family.
Please consider, and we will love you forever.
Go to patreon.com/Hallmarkies.
That's patreon.com/Hallmarkies.
You have a couple actually movies for Lifetime that I think are a little underrated that I wanted to talk about.
Sure.
One of your first movies is actually one of my favorite TV movies.
Oh.
Yeah, I love Love Notes.
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh.
I think that movie is so good.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
And Antonio Cupo is so dishy in that movie. I love him so much.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that was the second television film I made. And thank you for remembering it.
I have it on DVD.
Do you really? Oh, that's great.
That's
right.
Wow,
that's great. I had an amazing time making that film. I don't know if you realize, but Antonio was a producer on Raise a Glass to Love.
Oh,
and so we were, I'll have to tell him about this because we were good-naturedly teasing each other because I was, I said, like, I made you everything that you are today. And he was like, I don't think so. But he had just recently come back. He had been in television in Italy and he had come back to Canada, and I had never met him, and he was cast in the movie, and I was like, who is this Italian guy playing this country singer? Like, that's nuts. But he was and he is, Antonio, if you're ever listening to this, still a very handsome, really compelling performer. And then it was Laura Leighton who was the star. And there were so many things that were really interesting about that film because, for instance, Laura was older, which is not always the case in romantic comedies where the female protagonist is older than the male character. And she's pregnant through a lot of that film, and very visibly pregnant. So it's a rare it's a rare romantic comedy where the female character is ready to have her baby at any moment. So
when they just have such good chemistry and the banter, it's a really good one. And I really like her struggle to decide what to do, and it makes sense for her and her her character and who she is and her history. And I just think it's a good one. I really like it.
Thank you. I loved as well. I feel as well that anytime the movies have music in them or engage with music, that they get better, and that they also that they get that they get more emotional, because the music starts to reflect as an audience member, you start to feel like you understand what the characters are feeling because of the way they're engaged with the music. So that it just goes to show. I mean, it's stating the obvious, but it just goes to show how key music is to films and how much your experience of the movie is really bound up with how the right piece of music on each part of it. So
well, the other one for Lifetime that I really like is Every Day is Christmas.
Oh yeah.
And because I'm a huge Christmas Carol nerd, I love Christmas Carol, but I just really liked the idea in this one of the Scrooge character isn't really selfish. She's just broken. She's just traumatized by the loss of her parents in a very sudden thing. And then so to have her parents be the ghosts was such a smart way to take on with something different. I've never seen that in a version of Christmas Carol, to have the parents be the ghosts, and every time she saw them, it was devastating, which is so true. Like it wouldn't matter if, like, my grandpa who have lost like, it wouldn't matter if I had literally just said goodbye, seeing him again, I'd be like, oh,
Yeah, of course.
I
Yeah.
miss him so much.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was really good and
Well, thank
just
you.
very emotional. And I don't know, I just liked the different take on the story
Hmm.
of it being about trauma versus being like selfish.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love that movie as well. And you know, I felt very privileged to direct, Tony Braxton, but also, Gloria Rubin played the mother.
Yeah.
And Gloria Rubin is just a straight up phenomenal actress. I mean, she's one of those people who she's had prominence through her career. She has an amazing part as in the Steven Spielberg movie Lincoln. She plays the maid to Lincoln, and she has an amazing scene with Daniel Day-Lewis where they talk about the idea of the end of slavery. But I felt like I felt totally agree with you about the uniqueness of the premise of the movie. But what I also thought was really interesting is that, if you're a grown adult and your parents came back to you as a ghost, you wouldn't have the same relationship with them necessarily that you would have had when you were a child or a teenager. So when Gloria Rubin as the mother shows up, she's almost sort of like a sister to the Tony
Yeah,
Braxton
that's true.
character, and like an older sister.
Hmm.
And then the thing that I loved and that Gloria did so amazingly is that she's just totally happy to be there, like she's totally happy to be to have left the netherworld or what have you, and be back on Earth in her in her pantsuit.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was so it's just one of those movies where the wardrobe was amazing, and I was fortunate to work with an amazing cast, and then yeah, all the things that you said that were special about the story. I think that it really came together,
Mm.
and I just love that Tony and Gloria had that kind of relationship. So that for me, it's a very interesting romantic comedy because it's in the genre, because it's also sort of it has a kind of ghosts of old boyfriends aspect to it. But at the same time, the principal relationship that you follow all the way through the movie is the daughter and the mother.
Yeah.
And so, and I have, I started talking to you on this podcast about my dad, and he passed, many years ago. And so, yes, I'm not a woman, but at the same time, I understand the emotion that, that you were just alluding to. If one of your parents or your grandparent or a loved one came back, how emotionally overwhelmed you'd feel. But at the same time, what I really, as I said, what I really loved was that Gloria's character, the mother, she was just excited to be back on Earth, back messing around,
Yeah.
messing with her daughter's life, once again. So,
Hmm.
no, I
It
mean,
was really good.
oh, thank you.
You've had so many that I really enjoyed. Like, I mean, Christmas to Remember, that's definitely a fan
Yeah,
favorite.
yeah,
And
yeah. I love that movie.
yeah,
Yeah, and again, that's the thing where I just have been really fortunate because that was a movie where I got to work with Mira Sorvino and Cameron Matheson. But I had always loved Mira Sorvino. I had a huge crush on her when I was younger, and I told her, and she was amused by that, I think. And she's a comedic performer who is very, very gifted. And I mean, she has an Oscar, so that's not news, but there were so many things that she would do because, she's lost her memory. And so she would mangle words or language, in such a funny, cute fashion that it was, there was, it was real. That was one of those movies where it was unfortunate that it had to be 85 minutes, because you could have made a longer version of it and allowed those scenes to breathe even more. But
yeah,
I think that was very early in the current sort of iteration of of movies I've made for Hallmark, and that was when I knew that it was going to be exciting to work on these films, because here was someone that I had always I thought it was well beyond my aspirations to ever get a chance to work with them, and here we were, you know, trying to make it happen. So
Well, and that one was tricky because you have to balance, like, you don't want it to become we kind of joke Hallmark or horror, you know,
yeah,
with her being with these
yeah,
people and her
totally.
memory. And like, I don't know, that's a kind of a tricky thing to balance out, especially when she has a boyfriend and, you know, like
Yeah,
keeping it the right sort of tone
yeah,
is tough.
yeah, and that's where really thinking about those classic movies that we were talking about earlier is really helpful in terms of trying to kind of find the right tenor for, you know, say the boyfriend's performance, because you want to be on her side and want her to fall for Cameron's character, but at the same time you don't want her to be running around with this guy, you know, without, you know,
Hmm.
any connection to the past. So but that's what makes it interesting, and that's a lot of what we talk about when we're on the set is how, like, the right pitch to the scene. And, you know, is this too light, is this too heavy, is this does the character seem too, you know, in that story, you know, I know we talked about a lot, I got to talk with Mira a lot about, like, is the conceit about the memory does it make her too disconnected, you know, or how emotionally connected should she be, and trying to find that balance and then carrying that through into the edit suite is really what's really key for whether the movie's going to succeed or not, I think. So
Now, with Bottled with Love,
hmm
that was a movie that Hallmark obviously had a lot of confidence in. They really
hmm
loved it. They promoted it with like critics quotes and stuff. Like, it
hmm
was, we were like,
hmm
what is happening with this movie? But they were like, did you feel like when you were making it that like this is a good one?
Yeah, yeah. Again, I really like the script, and that movie gets referenced with "You've Got Mail" a lot.
Hmm.
But of course, I knew the original genesis of it, which is that Ernst Lubitsch film, which you probably know, "The Shop Around the Corner."
Right.
And so I, you know, it's a simple premise, but it's very. I felt it was ready to be made because everybody I knew was on their phone, right? Texting all the time. And it was right at not at the start, but it was right at that point where, you know, people were starting to text with partners or people that they might be interested in as romantic partners. And that thing was happening. And I was like, somebody should make a movie about that, because that's a way, you know, texting is really interesting because it's instantaneous, or it can be instantaneous, but on the one hand you're texting and you're saying all these things that are sort of intimate, but it's very disconnected, you're not saying it face to face.
Yeah.
And so to me, the movie was really about texting. And You've Got Mail is, if you've seen it recently, it's great movie, but they have to go to their computers, they have to sit down. You know, the You've Got Mail literally starts with that dial-up sound from the, you know,
Hmm.
from the 90s, I don't even know what it is, but of the, you know, of the connecting to the internet through your
Hmm.
Ethernet wire, you know. And so there's a strange, if you watch You've Got Mail, there's a strange formality to it, because none of it's very spontaneous. Like, Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan have to go home, go to the chat room, and connect with each other, you know, at a particular time in order to talk. Whereas with Andrew and Joy Lenz in Bottled with Love, you know, they can be arguing with each other and pull out their phones and be texting with each other at the same time.
That's true.
and
That's a good
and
point.
that was, I thought that was a whole thing. Like, I could make a still yet another whole romantic comedy, I think, about that, because that's so weird. I mean, that's such a, there's something weirdly schizophrenic about that.
Hmm.
And I think that was, I haven't, I actually should ask the executives that I know at Hallmark, but I think that was what they connected to. It felt like a very, so for that reason, it felt like a very contemporaneous story to me. It felt very of the moment, you know.
Hmm.
And then the other part of it that was really amazing for me was that, you know, Andrew and Joy knew each other from a previous movie. So right away, what I described earlier, which is that sort of process of getting to know one another and feeling comfortable with one another and feeling able to express vulnerability or romance or what have you in scenes, that was already taken care of, because they liked each other and they had made a romantic comedy together. So you had a bit of that chemistry to start with, and we could manipulate that. And they had just as much fun, particularly Joy with Andrew, making fun of him and teasing him or being frosty toward him as she did, as if as was in the story. So there weren't any barriers between, like, oh, I just met this person on Thursday and here it is Friday and I have to kiss them. So there's that part of it. Then the other thing that I thought was really amazing was the speech that, or the note that Joy throws in the bottle at the beginning of the movie. That was rewritten by Joy. And that reflects a lot of, and I hope she doesn't mind me saying this, but that reflects a lot of her experience in relationships and where she is at as a woman, and disappointments that she's had, but also things that she'd come to love and appreciate about herself. And so that was an instance where the writing was already really, really good, but that message was rewritten by Joy right at the top of the movie, and that gave it a greater feeling because that was genuinely reflective of who she was and what her feelings were.
Yeah.
And I just think that made the movie, it made it a notch above, because it had already, an emotional investment from the performers that you might not have seen if they just picked up a script and read the lines. So.
Yeah, it was good. Especially that pancake scene is the highlight of the film.
Yeah.
It's very cute.
And Joy was very excited to eat that many pancakes. She was like, you don't have to pay me for this scene. Yeah, I'll just do this scene for free. Yeah.
Well, Christmas Town is a movie that was actually my favorite the year it came out. I said that from Hallmark, I felt like it was kind of the perfect Hallmark movie. It had all of the elements that you want at first: community and romance and family, all of that in there. And I thought it was really well done. And every time she would read one of those letters,
yeah.
That was I really I enjoyed that one.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that was an interesting movie because we actually shot a bit of that movie on a backlot, and it's always a struggle to find, a lot of the Hallmark movies, particularly in the past, have centered around kind of the town square in the town, and that can be hard to find because in modern culture, towns are built around like the mall, or a lot of towns have unfortunately all but sort of demolished that sort of square, and so we had found this backlot which was built for a television series in the 90s, or maybe a movie, I can't recall, but it was just about to be torn down. And Craig Anderson, who was the producer, we went and we looked all over the place, and I kept saying, the movie's called Christmas Town. Like it's not called Christmas Highway. So this place, look, there's a highway that goes through, like you're taking me to this, you're saying this could be this town square, and there's a highway. It's, at a strip mall. So we went to see this backlot, and we thought we could get in to shoot literally, I think 2 weeks before it was torn down to become a used car dealership. And I was like, we just have to do it. And Craig Anderson was the producer on that movie, and I think he might have written a check out of his own pocket, or he helped anyway. And we were able to shoot there for, I think, a week. And we shot all those great scenes where, she's walking down the street and she first comes to the town, or where she crosses the street, and where they have the town villagers come together, the townsfolk come together, and they have the tree lighting. And that was, again, it was part of my, my fascination with old movies, where they would shoot, they go, and shoot on the Warner Brothers lot where they had the New York street. And you can see, I've seen a documentary where you can see, oh, that's the street in that movie with Jimmy Stewart, and there's the street in that movie with Mickey Rooney, and there's, and that, so I just found that immensely pleasurable. Plus it opened the movie up just physically, because it meant that I wasn't, trying to shoot these scenes about the town with 3 lanes of traffic right behind me. And so there's, it goes back to what we talked about earlier. There's a lot of practical considerations to directing as well. And one of the reasons that I was really so excited and intent on shooting on the backlot for that was that I really wanted us, to have that feeling of a town where, if you're just crossing the street, you might run into the neighbor, and those conversations happen spontaneously. Whereas if you're shooting and there's a highway, and then you're not going to run into the neighbor unless you're on the traffic island or something. So it was just all these simple, pragmatic things, and trying to figure out what the theme of the movie was, and then follow through in the theme. And that was,
I wouldn't have known that it was shot on a lot, but now that you say it, there's a coziness to the movie that I think is why I felt like this is just a perfect Hallmark movie, because it just had that, it was like everything was filmed with like an amber hue to it. It was just very cozy.
Yes, and we did that as well on purpose. Ryan McMaster, who's my, I've made now probably 6 or 8 films with him. He's a great cinematographer, and he shot Bottled with Love. And with Bottled with Love, I mean, we tried to make the office was all white and geometric, and not cold, but not a terrifically welcoming space. And then that that contrasted with Joy's character's home, which was had a lot of amber quality to it, and richness and saturated colors and all that sort of thing. And then Ryan shot Christmastown, and what we wanted it to feel like was like an old, I said to him, it's like as if you found like an old set of Christmas cards, from the 40s or something, and they had kind of yellowed a little bit with age, and you pulled them out, and that's what I wanted the town to look like. And so he, in the old days, they would have put some pantyhose over the lens or something that would give it that kind of sepia quality. But what, now they just move all the dials on the camera and everything. It's like your iPhone. And that's exactly what we were trying to do. I wanted it to feel like a contemporary film, but it like as if it all took place in the present day, but it had a little bit of feeling of nostalgia or the past to it.
Well, I think it succeeded.
Thank you.
One last one I have to talk about is it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas.
Oh yeah.
Which I really enjoyed. We do these things called watch-alongs with our patrons that we invite a talent on to talk about. We watch the movie, one of their movies, and we hear behind the scenes and everything. So we had Rick Garman on, and we watched It's Beginning to Look a Lot Like Christmas, because I just think it's really underrated. I think that it's frustrating because, first of all, I think the title doesn't tell you anything. I don't understand why they gave it that title, especially if you're going to have it at the end of the season. Why would you have it be called It's Beginning to Look a Lot Like Christmas? Yeah. And like, I think it would have been better if they'd had it like the Christmas Feud or the Christmas Rivalry or something like that. But so I think a lot of people didn't watch it because, it's the end of the season. But if they had, they would have realized that it was really good. And the thing I guess I liked the most about it was just, I thought it was really funny. And
good.
Not even just the main couple, but I also really thought the secondary characters were really funny.
Oh, the assistants.
The assistants.
To the mayors.
Everything. That was really funny to me. And I don't know, just the whole concept of like this town being divided in two, and this rivalry, and like even to the extent of the coffee shop is literally split down the middle. it was really funny to me.
Yeah.
And I liked Trisha and Eric in the lead roles. They
Yeah.
had good chemistry.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I had a great time making it. That was the first movie that I made. I've made two movies with Jim Head, and that was the first, who was the executive producer, and he's often involved in the scripts as well. But Rick, who I have to confess, I don't know. He wrote a great script, so that was an instance where there wasn't much work to be done on the script at all. And I just love that idea as well about the two towns that are we had that little montage sequence at the
Yeah, I
beginning
love that.
explaining, yeah,
Like a
and I
sizzle reel kind of.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I just love the idea that everybody sort of acknowledged that the two towns really should be one town, but at the same time, nobody could kind of figure out how to bring it about to make it one town again. So I thought that was really pleasurable. And again, like sort of the idea that you would see in a movie from the 40s, I thought.
Yeah.
And there is a British film that I talked about when I first was talking to Jim about it, called Passport to Pimlico, which is about a borough. It's a really forgotten movie, but I saw it someplace, and it's about a borough in London, Pimlico, who right after the Second World War, they don't feel they're being treated well by the government, and so they declare themselves their own country. And of course, it's full of all those colorful British Cockney characters and all that sort of thing. But I thought that was sort of the thing, was that everybody sort of knew it was ridiculous. In the Passport to Pimlico, everybody sort of knew the whole premise was, the whole idea that they were their own country was ridiculous, but they went along with it. And I thought that was what Trisha and Eric, that was the great thing about that movie, was they were so invested in being mayor of their town. But also, for sure, the assistants were, I had to, once or twice, I was like, you can't steal the movie from,
They
from the
were
leads.
so funny. I loved them. And I also loved Peter Benson in the movie. I
Yeah.
thought that his character was really good. And to have like a functioning co-parenting kind of situation was
Yeah,
really
where they weren't
refreshing.
enemies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I really enjoyed that as well. And now Peter's directing, and he was
Mm.
he was asking a lot of questions on the set.
Yeah, he just did last weekend's movie.
Yeah.
That just aired.
No, yeah, I haven't seen him for a while, but I've made two films with him. I made one of the Wedding March films with him as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, no, I mean, I loved it. And I just have to say, I think Tricia Helfer is like a hugely underrated actress.
Yeah.
She's she started as a supermodel, but she's one of the funniest.
Yeah, you don't normally think of her as funny because she's like in
Yeah.
Battlestar Galactica and stuff like that.
Yeah. And then I made a
she's
movie.
very funny.
Yeah, I made a movie with her called Operation Christmas, which was again produced by Craig Anderson, but that was basically very early in this phase of my career with Hallmark. And that was almost a straight drama, because it was about military families at Christmas, and trying to get through the holiday season when your spouse is overseas and all that sort of thing. So Trisha has that ability. She can
Mhm.
go she can go to the dramatic side. But then in its beginning, she's so light in that movie and so much fun, and you forget that she's gorgeous. Again, in the way that you would, I think, that she's a perfect example. If there was a studio system, she would be like one of those performers from the 40s where, I mean, part of the reason you don't resent Cary Grant's beauty is because he makes fun of himself, and because he's comedic. And that's the same thing with someone like Trisha or Mira or Joy Lenz or any of these performers, is that they're willing to laugh at themselves, and that makes them approachable and fun. You want to spend an hour and a half with them. So.
Yeah. Well, and it was refreshing too to see Eric maybe in a comedy kind of role, because
Yeah.
we're used to him in is Oliver in Signed, Sealed, Delivered, and
Yeah.
some of these more more serious kind of roles.
Yeah.
And so and he's sort of buttoned up in Signed, Sealed, Delivered, and to see him kind of play this a little bit more unhinged kind of
Yeah.
character, just a
Yeah.
little bit, I think it was fun, and they had good chemistry, and I don't know, I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was very
Good.
funny, and
Oh, great.
so I hope people will check it out if they
Yeah.
haven't seen it, because I was kind of bummed about where it got placed in the lineup, and all that stuff, and like I said, the title, I was like, what, this doesn't even make any sense. It doesn't have anything to do with the movie.
Yeah. 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 No, I mean, for me, that side of it is I'm somewhat removed from it. The movies, once they're made, it's kind of
Oh
like your
yeah.
kids, like you just wish them the best and you hope for, that things will work out for them. But for me, the investment is just in the making of it and the experience of it. And as you can tell from just this talk, a lot of it for me is about, I had a great film prof when I was in film school who said, every director is just remaking the movies that they loved when they were like 16 or 17 years old. And I just always loved those romantic comedies, and I loved those George Cukor films and
Mhm.
those films that we've been talking about. And I just, whenever I'm fortunate enough to get sent a script for one of these films, inevitably I start thinking about those movies.
Yeah.
And oh, this movie's a bit like this, and didn't they, this scene, didn't they do that amazingly in that, in that old Cary
Mhm.
Grant movie or that Jean Arthur movie or what have you. And so to me, a lot of it is about that experience and trying to bring to the audience some of the feeling that I had when I sat in that movie theater when I was,
Yeah.
17 years old.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, I was looking through the filmography, and I'm like, I like that one, and I like that one, and I like that
Oh,
one.
great. Oh,
Good.
great. That's great. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So thank you for taking the time to talk with us. This was really fun.
Oh,
I
good.
really enjoyed it. And I don't know, do you have social media or anything like that you want to share?
No,
I don't blame you.
yeah, I opted out of that.
I don't blame
No, I
you.
mean, maybe it's a generational thing, but for me, um, it's still the experience of watching the films, and I see my kids, and their attention spans are challenged.
Yeah.
And so for me, when social media started to become a thing, even though I made Bottled with Love, and I obviously, that was about texting, for me, it's like a thing of if I don't want to live that fractured a life,
Yeah.
so
No, I totally understand.
yeah.
Well, if you're listening to this podcast, let us know what you think of all the different things we talked about. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section, or you can follow us on Twitter at HallmarkiesPod. And please, if you're listening on iTunes, please leave your ratings and reviews. We really appreciate that. And if you are watching on YouTube, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We appreciate that so much. We also have our Patreon group, which we do the watch alongs that I mentioned, and we have a lot of fun. Check that out. And we have our merch store, which has a ton of fun design. So please take a look at that. And thank you so much, David. Really appreciate getting a chance to talk with you. And hopefully we'll have to have you back on again, because there's even more that we could talk about.
I love it. So thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Take care.